They said elephants and dogs could never understand each other. But that was before Mara, the matriarch who carried a dying German shepherd across 15 kilometers of blazing plains, not out of instinct, but love. When rangers at the Wyoming Reserve saw her silhouette through the morning mist, they thought it was a mirage. A lone elephant, walking straight toward the ranger station, with something hanging from her trunk. Dust, sweat, and blood painted her path. Every step looked like it cost her everything, but she never stopped. What no one knew then was that 3 days earlier, a chance encounter between a lonely elephant and an abandoned police dog had changed both their lives. One act of trust, one impossible journey, and now, as she crossed the line between wilderness and civilization, carrying a creature from another world, she was about to teach humankind something we had forgotten, that love knows no species, no border, and no fear. The first light of dawn unfurled across the Wyoming plains like liquid gold spilling over a sleeping world. The land stretched endlessly, rolling fields of sage and dust, the occasional lone acacia breaking the horizon, the silence so vast, it felt sacred. The wind moved softly, whispering through dry grass, carrying with it the scent of wild earth. Ranger Jack Dawson sat on the hood of his weathered patrol truck, coffee steaming in a metal cup beside him. The sunrise bathed his face in amber light, outlining the deep lines that spoke of years spent under this sky. His niece Emily sat cross-legged beside him, sketchbook in her lap, her blonde hair tangled in the morning breeze. At 12, she had her mother's quiet curiosity and Jack's stubborn streak. "Uncle Jack," she murmured, pencil moving lightly, "do you ever get tired of watching the same sunrise every morning?" Jack smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the ridges turning crimson. "You'd think so, kiddo. But everyone's a little different. Some mornings, the sky looks like it forgives you for living. Others, like it's reminding you of what you lost." Emily looked up. "You mean Aunt Clara?" He shook his head slowly. "No, someone else, someone who didn't make it back." The quiet that followed was soft, but heavy. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photo, a young officer kneeling beside a German shepherd, strong, alert, eyes bright with loyalty. Across the bottom, faded letters read, "Rex, K9 Unit, 2011-2018. Emily traced the image. "He was your partner, right?" "Yeah," Jack said, voice low. "Smartest dog I ever met. Saved my life more times than I can count. We were a team." Then one night, during a bust gone wrong, he ran back into the building after me. The roof came down before I could reach him. Emily closed her sketchbook gently. "You still miss him?" "Every damn day." Jack's voice cracked, a whisper carried off by the wind. They sat in silence after that, the kind that only the wild knows, where grief and beauty coexist. The sun lifted higher, scattering the mist that clung to the ground like ghost breath. Then, something changed. Emily's pencil slipped from her fingers, her gaze locked on the horizon. "Uncle Jack, what's that?" Jack squinted toward the haze. At first it looked like a shimmer, a mirage of heat and light. But then, the shape moved, massive, slow, purposeful. Dust swirled around it like a golden storm. He stood, instinct kicking in, binoculars in hand. The lenses caught the morning light and froze. His heart thudded once, hard. "Sweet Lord," he breathed. "What is it?" Emily whispered. Jack didn't answer. Through the glass, the impossible came into focus. A giant elephant, gray hide streaked with red dust and sweat, walking straight toward them. Its trunk cradled something small and limp, swaying gently with each step. And then he saw it clearly. The fur, the shape, the blood. A dog. A German shepherd. Jack lowered the binoculars slowly, disbelief etched in every line of his face. Emily, it's carrying a dog. A dog? You mean, it's trying to help it? I don't know, he said hoarsely. I've never seen anything like this. Every ranger instinct screamed caution. Wild elephants didn't approach human settlements. Not here, not this close. But there it was, closing the distance with steady, deliberate grace, guided by something deeper than fear. Jack's hand hovered near his tranquilizer rifle, but he hesitated. There was no aggression, just exhaustion. Each step heavy, yet filled with resolve. Dust glittered under the rising sun. The giant's torn skin, streaks of dried mud, eyes dark with sorrow. She's hurt too, Emily whispered. Jack nodded slowly. Yeah, and she's been traveling a long way. The radio inside the truck crackled, but he didn't move. Every instinct told him. One wrong sound could shatter something sacred. The elephant stopped 100 yards away. The dog in her trunk twitched. A paw. A breath. Emily gasped. He's alive! Jack's throat tightened. Training said retreat. His heart said, stay. He stepped forward. Just one cautious pace. The air felt electric. The elephant lifted her head, eyes old as time. Mara, he whispered, naming her without knowing why. She didn't move, but her trunk shifted slightly, as if acknowledging the sound. Dust glimmered around her in the light, like gold rain. Emily, get inside the truck. But Uncle, now. His voice was firm, but his eyes never left the elephant. Emily backed toward the truck, trembling with awe more than fear. Through the cracked window, she whispered, She's crying. Jack blinked. For a moment, he thought it was the light, until he saw it. A tear glinting down the elephant's cheek. The moment held. A living painting of dust and gold and heartbreak. The wounded dog dangled gently from the trunk. The elephant stood like a monument to a forgotten truth. That love, in its purest form, has no boundaries. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of blood and earth. Jack heard the faint rasp of the dog's breath, the low rumble in the elephant's chest, like a mother soothing her child. He lifted his radio slowly. Base, he said, voice trembling. This is Dawson. You're not going to believe what I'm seeing. Static. Silence. Jack looked back. At the elephant. At the miracle before him. A wild creature crossing the barrier between worlds, carrying not her own kind, but another's. Carrying hope. The golden light deepened, wrapping them all in warmth. The ranger, the child, the beast, and the dying dog, all bound by something wordless and divine. And as the first true rays of morning broke across the plain, Jack Dawson realized the world he thought he understood had just changed forever. 3 days earlier, before dawn touched the Wyoming plains, the world was still and gray. The air hung heavy with the dryness of a long drought, and even the wind seemed to hesitate before crossing that empty land. Out beyond the scattered oaks and broken fences, a great shadow moved slowly against the dying light. Mara, the old elephant matriarch, the last of her small herd, still searching for a path that no longer existed. For decades, she had followed the same migration routes her ancestors had carved through the grasslands, led by memory and instinct. But now the paths were blocked by metal fences that glittered under the sun, human-made barriers cutting across water routes, grazing plains and lives. The others had turned back days ago, driven by thirst and exhaustion, but Mara had wandered too far to return. She moved through a world she once knew, now scarred by wire and silence. Her skin was marked with dust and time, her tusks chipped from breaking fences and roots. Yet in her ancient eyes, there was still clarity, the awareness of a creature who had seen the world change too fast and learned to bear it. As the heat thickened, she reached a dried riverbed, a scar of cracked clay winding through the savanna. Her steps sank softly into the earth, and for the first time that morning, she paused, to drink from a memory. Where water once ran, her reflection used to shimmer. That was when she heard it. A faint, ragged panting, uneven, desperate. It was not the cry of prey, nor the call of any beast she knew. It was a sound of pain, but also defiance. Mara turned her massive head toward the noise, her ears twitching. From between two fallen logs stumbled a creature she had never seen up close. A dog. Fur dulled by dust, ribs showing, one hind leg dragging slightly. His eyes, though weary, burned with something familiar. Survival. The wind carried their scents to one another. The elephant smelled the tang of blood and metal on him. The dog caught the wild, earthy musk of her skin. For a moment both froze, measuring the distance between predator and giant. Then, somewhere in the distance, a chorus of howls shattered the stillness. Coyotes, thin and hungry. The dog turned toward the sound, teeth bared, growling low. Mara understood. She lifted her head, trunk curling protectively. When the coyotes appeared at the ridge, 6 of them, shadows against the sun, they stopped short. The ground trembled under Mara's weight as she took one powerful step forward and let out a deep, rumbling trumpet that shook the air. The coyotes scattered. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder, and silence followed in its wake. The dog turned, chest heaving, watching the massive creature before him. Mara lowered her trunk, curiosity outweighing caution. She reached forward, slowly, until the tip brushed the air above his head. The dog stiffened, then sat, tail thumping weakly once, as if offering truce. In that strange, wordless exchange, something ancient stirred. 2 beings from different worlds recognizing pain in the other. For the rest of the day, they walked together. The dog limped alongside Mara's heavy strides, sometimes darting ahead, sometimes falling behind. He barked at a glint of metal in the sand, a forgotten trap half buried, and Mara paused, studying him. Somehow he understood danger before she did. Each bark was a warning, each pause, an unspoken promise to protect. That night, they found refuge beneath a lone cottonwood tree, its branches whispering under the moonlight. The plains cooled, the stars stretched infinite above them. Mara rested her massive body beside the trunk, eyes half closed, while the dog curled near her front leg, too tired to fear. Every so often, she rumbled softly, a low vibration, like the sound of the earth itself breathing. The dog lifted his head each time, as if listening to a lullaby in a language older than words. When the moon reached its highest point, Mara stretched her trunk toward the heavens. The silver light touched her scars. The wind brushed through her ears, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel entirely alone. The dog stirred in his sleep, paws twitching as if chasing dreams. Mara's gaze softened. Perhaps, she thought, even in this broken land, companionship could still be found. By morning, the sun rose crimson over the plains, a warning disguised as beauty. The dog woke first, alert, ears pricking east. His limp had worsened, but his spirit had not. Mara stood slowly, dust rising around her feet. Together they continued onward, drawn by the faint smell of water and the promise of shade. Then it happened. The air shimmered with heat. The ground ahead seemed ordinary, until the dog stepped forward, paws crunching lightly on dry grass. In an instant, the world snapped. A metallic clang, followed by a strangled yelp that tore through the silence. Ranger, that was his name, though no one had called it in months, fell sideways, twisting in agony. The steel snare bit deep into his hind leg, slicing through fur and flesh. He struggled, cried out, pulled harder, and the loop tightened mercilessly. Mara's heart thundered. She rushed forward, trumpeting an alarm, the sound echoing across the canyon. Dust rose in clouds as she knelt beside him, trunk trembling. The sight of his bleeding leg, the glint of cruel wire, ignited a rage older than fire. She tried to free him, trunk wrapping the wire, pulling, twisting. But each movement made the dog scream. His eyes rolled in pain, foam at his mouth, yet he didn't bite. He trusted her. Mara groaned, frustration breaking into despair. She pushed her tusks against the stake anchoring the trap. The metal cut into her skin, staining her tusks red. Still, she pushed again. The earth shook beneath her weight. The stake gave slightly, but the wire held firm. The dog whimpered, licking her trunk as if apologizing. The sound broke her completely. She let out a cry that shook the horizon. Not a sound of anger, but of grief, fury, helplessness. Birds scattered from the trees. A herd of antelope froze in the distance. Even the wind seemed to stop, to mourn with her. The sun climbed mercilessly above them, searing the ground. Mara stood over the wounded dog, chest heaving. She rumbled low, a call for help that no one would hear. The smell of blood filled the air. When the dog's breathing slowed, she lowered her trunk and touched his side gently, feeling the faint rhythm still there. Fragile, but alive. Her tears fell onto the red earth, darkening the dust beneath them. And in that moment, something changed inside her. A memory of humans once kneeling beside a wounded bison, hands gentle, voices calm. The creature had lived because of them. She had seen it with her own eyes. Now, looking down at this small, broken dog, Mara understood. Love had brought her this far, but love alone would not be enough. She lifted her head, eyes turning toward the horizon, where faint trails of smoke from the ranger station touched the sky. The decision came not from thought, but from the deepest core of her being. She would carry him. She would walk until she found help. As she wrapped her trunk carefully around the dog's body, lifting him from the dust, the first rays of afternoon light touched her back. It burned, but she didn't stop. Step by step, across the vast, unforgiving plains, Mara began her 15-kilometer journey of hope, carrying not only a wounded stranger, but the fragile weight of something greater. The belief that even in a world divided by fear, compassion could still find a way home. The midday sun blazed like fire over the Wyoming plains, scorching everything beneath its relentless glare. The air shimmered above the cracked earth, and the horizon seemed to bleed into the sky. In that merciless light, Mara stood motionless, her shadow stretching long and thin across the ground. The faint wind carried the scent of blood and dust, the scent of the small life cradled in her trunk. Ranger, the wounded shepherd dog, barely stirred. His breathing was shallow, uneven, a fragile rhythm that faltered more with each passing minute. Mara lowered her massive head, pressing her trunk gently against his chest. A faint beat responded beneath her touch, weak but still there. It was enough. For a long while she stood that way, ancient, grieving, unyielding. Around her, the wilderness lay in silence, as though the world itself held its breath. Somewhere far in the distance, faint trumpets of her herd echoed across the plains, calling her back. The instinct to return, to safety, to family, to the rhythm of migration, trembled inside her bones. Yet when she turned her gaze toward the horizon, toward the line where dust met sky, her heart answered with something else. Memory. It came not as a thought, but as a sensation, a whisper from long ago, carried on the wind. The smell of rain, the sound of men's voices, the sharp, metallic click of tools she had once feared. She closed her eyes, and the years folded backward like waves retreating from shore. She was small again, a calf standing beneath her mother's shadow in a lush valley, long before fences had sliced through the land. The grass had been green then, rivers deep and cool. One day, distant thunder had drawn their attention, not from storms, but from engines. Her mother had turned, wary, ears spread wide. Humans were near. Through the brush, young Mara had watched them. Two men in khaki uniforms kneeling beside a fallen bison, its flank pierced by an arrow. The animal thrashed weakly, its breaths ragged. Mara remembered her mother's low rumbles of warning, the fear of the unknown, of these upright creatures who built fences and carried death in their hands. But the men hadn't come to kill. They had come to save. She remembered the glint of sunlight on metal, the tools they carried. She remembered the sound of soft voices, not shouting, not cruel. And then the smell, sharp but strangely comforting, medicine. One of the men pressed cloths against the bison's wound while the other spoke gently, his tone rhythmic, reassuring. The bison had calmed. Its eyes, once wild with panic, began to soften. The humans worked until the bleeding stopped, wrapping the wound with strange white bands. Then they stood, watching the creature breathe again. Mara remembered the way they stepped back, giving it space, as if they understood that healing was not just a human thing, but a sacred act of trust. When the bison finally rose, trembling but alive, one of the men removed his hat and whispered something under his breath. Gratitude, maybe. The image had stayed buried in Mara's mind all her life, an impossible contradiction to everything she had learned about humans. They were destroyers, builders of walls, makers of traps, and yet, she had seen them heal. Now, as she looked down at the dying dog in her care, that buried memory surfaced like a forgotten star. The humans had saved one creature once. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could do it again. She gazed toward the far-off ranger station, a faint blur in the distance, where thin trails of smoke from morning campfires rose into the blazing sky. It was far, 15 kilometers, maybe more. A journey across scorching plains, thorn patches, and dry riverbeds. Even for a strong elephant, it was punishment. But for Mara, burdened and weary, it was nearly impossible. She shifted her weight, feeling the pull of exhaustion in her limbs. Her herd's call came again, louder this time, pleading. She could almost feel them moving beyond the horizon, the pulse of their steps faintly trembling through the earth. Her place was with them, to lead, to guide, to survive. That was the law of her kind. But when she looked again at the dog, his chest rising shallowly, his fur matted with blood, his face turned toward her even in unconsciousness, something deeper stirred, a force beyond instinct, beyond fear. Love. It wasn't the kind that belonged to a herd or a species. It was something raw and borderless, a recognition of shared suffering, of two beings caught in the same cruel world, trying to hold on to life. Mara rumbled softly, a low vibration that rolled through the air, a sound elephants used for comfort, for safety. The dog's ear twitched weakly. She took it as a sign. With care that defied her size, she coiled her trunk around him once more. His weight was almost nothing to her, but his fragility was everything. She lifted him close to her chest, shielding him from the heat. Then, with one last look toward the fading horizon where her herd had gone, she turned and began to walk the other way. The first steps were slow, heavy, deliberate. Her massive feet pressed deep into the dry earth, leaving behind prints that would mark this moment for days. Above, a hawk circled, curious. Ahead, the land stretched endlessly, a battlefield of survival. As she moved, the wild took notice. Herds of zebra paused in their grazing, heads raised. Antelope froze mid-step, their ears flicking toward the rumbling sound. Even the predators, a pair of lean coyotes, stood still on a ridge, watching. None dared follow. It was as if the wilderness itself understood that this was no ordinary journey. Each kilometer brought new pain. Thorns tore at the tough skin of her legs. Dust burned her eyes. The sun pressed against her back like a living weight. But through it all, Mara never faltered. Every few steps, she rumbled softly, not for herself, but for the fragile heartbeat she carried. Ranger drifted between worlds, consciousness flickering like a candle in wind. Sometimes his paw twitched, and his eyes opened just enough to see the shape of her trunk above him, the sway of her body as she moved. He didn't understand what she was, or where she was going, but instinct told him she was safe. His breathing steadied when she spoke to him in her low, thunder-like hums. As the sun dipped lower, painting the plains in red and gold, Mara reached the edge of a dry riverbed. She paused, legs trembling. Her shadow stretched across the cracked clay, one enormous shape carrying a smaller one, fragile but alive. In the distance, the faint outline of human structures shimmered in the haze. The ranger station. Unreachable, yet undeniable. Mara lifted her trunk to the wind, tasting the air. Human scent, smoke, the faint tang of metal. Fear prickled through her. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but she tightened her grip on the life she held and stepped forward. Each movement echoed a truth older than any instinct. Love gives courage beyond survival. And so, under a burning sky, an elephant carried a dying dog through a wilderness that watched in silence. The first steps of a journey that would change both their worlds, forever. The radio crackled to life, breaking the silence that hung over the Wyoming plains, like glass ready to shatter. Ranger Jack Dawson stood frozen beside his patrol truck, his eyes locked on the impossible sight before him. A massive elephant trudging through the haze, carrying a bleeding dog in her trunk. His voice shook as he pressed the transmitter. "Base, this is Dawson," he said, forcing the words through a tightening throat. "You're not going to believe what I'm seeing. We've got a wild elephant approaching the station, and she's carrying a German shepherd. Looks hurt bad." Over. There was a long pause. Then static. Then disbelief. "Repeat that, Dawson," came the voice of the operations officer, muffled by interference. "Did you say carrying a dog?" "Affirmative," Jack replied. "A live dog. She's about a mile out heading straight toward the station. No signs of aggression. Looks like she's coming for help." More static. Then another voice. Dr. Grace McConnell, lead wildlife veterinarian at the Regional Rescue Center. "Jack, this is Grace. I'm en route from the South Reserve. Are you absolutely certain about what you're describing?" Jack's eyes never left the elephant. She was still moving, slow, deliberate, dust rising around her like a halo. "I've been doing this job 23 years, he said. "I've seen animals do remarkable things. But this," he swallowed hard, "this is different. She knows where she's going." At the other end, silence stretched long enough for doubt to creep in. Grace exhaled audibly through the line. "Elephants don't approach humans voluntarily," she said finally. "Especially not to ask for help. It's not in their behavior patterns. Jack glanced at the wounded shepherd hanging limp in the elephant's trunk. Then you better update the textbooks, he murmured, because that's exactly what's happening. Behind him, Emily tugged at his sleeve, her wide eyes reflecting both fear and awe. Uncle Jack, she's getting closer. He nodded without looking away. Yeah, I see her. Can't we help? She asked softly. She's not trying to hurt anyone. She's scared. Look at her eyes. He crouched down to her level, voice steady but gentle. We're going to try, kiddo. But this is a wild elephant. You stay behind the truck until I say it's safe. Emily hesitated, then whispered, She came all this way for help. We can't turn her away. Jack's heart clenched. There was something about the conviction in her voice, that innocent certainty that the world could still be kind, that cut deeper than any order he'd ever followed. He lifted the radio again. Base, get a medic team ready, and tell Grace to bring everything she's got for trauma care. We're going to need it. As his transmission went out, the small ranger station 5 miles away burst into motion. Grace McConnell, tall, sharp-eyed, with the steady hands of someone used to saving life on the edge of chaos, grabbed her field kit. She'd treated bison, wolves, even bears, but the idea of an elephant walking toward human contact made her pulse race in a way that had nothing to do with adrenaline. At the corner of the room, a quiet voice spoke. Maybe she knows. Grace turned. Eli Redfeather, the native tracker and wildlife behaviorist, stood by the window, his dark eyes calm, unreadable, like the land itself. Knows what? She asked, slinging a med pack over her shoulder. That you can help. Grace gave a tight, skeptical laugh. Eli, she's an elephant, not a mind reader. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried centuries of patience. Maybe not from most humans, he said softly. But the world listens differently when it's desperate. Sometimes instinct learns to trust what reason fears. Grace paused, his words settling in her mind like a seed. For all her science, she'd seen moments that defied it. A mother bear returning to the site of her cub's rescue months later. A wild horse nuzzling a veterinarian's sleeve after surgery. Still, this was different. An elephant crossing into human space with another species in her care? That was something sacred. She pushed her doubts aside and motioned toward the door. Let's move. Dawson's going to need us. Within minutes, the team loaded into 2 jeeps, medical coolers rattling in the back. Grace rode up front, scanning the horizon as the station shrank behind them. The radio buzzed again with updates from Jack. She's moving steadily, his voice came through. No aggression, no confusion. She's walking like she knows exactly where to go. How far? Grace asked. 1/2 mile, Jack replied. We'll have visual contact any minute. Eli leaned toward the radio. Dawson, listen carefully. If she's approaching willingly, keep your distance. No sudden movements, no loud noises. Elephants remember trauma. They can read your fear before you even show it. Understood, Jack said. His tone had changed, softer, almost reverent. The road curved and Grace caught her first glimpse of the plains. Through the shimmering heat, she saw the shape rising from the dust. Mara, her great frame cutting against the horizon, sunlight glinting off her tusks. For a moment, the world seemed to still. Grace pressed a hand to her chest. Dear God. Even from a distance, it was clear this wasn't a random wandering. Mara's movements were purposeful, rhythmic. Every step a declaration of will. The small body in her trunk swayed gently, wrapped with an impossible tenderness. Eli murmured something under his breath in his native Lakota tongue, a prayer of respect. What did you say? Grace asked. I said the earth remembers mercy, he replied simply. When they reached the station clearing, Jack was already waiting, binoculars hanging from his neck, Emily peeking from behind him, unable to look away. The team gathered in a line, silent, the way one might stand in a church. "She's right there," Jack said quietly, "about 200 yards out." Mara stopped, the ground trembling faintly beneath her feet. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of antiseptic from the station, the same scent that marked her long-ago memory of healing. She lifted her trunk, sniffing the air, and took one more step. In that moment, something unseen passed between them, a thread connecting the wild and the human, bound by trust neither side could explain. Grace's fingers tightened around her stethoscope. "If she's really coming here for help," she whispered, "then she's placing her life, and his, in our hands." Eli nodded. "Then let's prove we deserve it." Behind them, Emily spoke again, her voice trembling but sure. "She's not the only one taking a chance." Everyone turned to her. The child's eyes glistened, reflecting the great gray figure still walking through the dust. "She believes in us," Emily said softly. "Now it's our turn to believe in her." The words hung in the air, carried on the wind, merging with the low rumble that drifted from Mara's chest. A sound of weary hope. As the radio hissed with fading static and the horizon burned gold, humanity and nature stood on the edge of something extraordinary. A meeting neither science nor instinct could define, born only from faith. And for the first time, every human there understood the same truth Mara already knew. Tempo 600. Sometimes, help is not asked for in words, it's carried in trust. The air shimmered with heat as the Wyoming plains held their breath. Dust rose in slow spirals around the ranger station, turning sunlight into liquid gold. Every sound seemed to fade. No birds, no wind, not even the creak of metal roofs. Only the rhythmic thud of footsteps approached, deliberate and unhurried, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Mara emerged from the haze. Her enormous form seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. Her skin was cracked from sun and time, streaked with dried mud and blood that caught the light like scars of war. Her trunk trembled from exhaustion, but she moved with dignity, every step a vow. And in that trunk, wrapped in gentle precision, hung the limp body of Ranger, the German shepherd whose life flickered between worlds. From a distance, the scene looked unreal, a mirage painted by grief and grace. But as she drew closer, the impossible turned solid. Jack Dawson stood frozen beside his truck, one hand gripping his binoculars though he no longer needed them. Behind him, Emily, Grace McConnell, and Eli Redfeather watched in silence, their faces pale under the sunlight. Even the rangers stationed nearby, men who'd faced poachers, fires, and floods, found their breath caught somewhere between awe and fear. "She's here," Jack murmured, as though speaking too loudly might break the spell. Grace stepped forward, her heart hammering. "Dear Lord." No one answered. Mara stopped at the edge of the clearing, dust swirling around her massive feet. Her head hung low, trunk swaying slightly, as if steadying the fragile weight she carried. For a moment, the entire world narrowed to the space between her and the humans, that invisible boundary where instinct and civilization had stood apart for millennia. Then, slowly, almost reverently, Mara moved closer. Each step was a prayer, each breath a test of faith. Jack could feel the vibration through the soles of his boots, the soft, thunderous rhythm of her approach. He swallowed hard, torn between the need to protect his team and the overwhelming sense that this moment wasn't theirs to control. "Hold position," he whispered into his radio, though no one dared to move anyway. When Mara reached the open ground before the station, she paused. Her shadow fell across them like a living mountain. Then, with painstaking care, she bent her knees, her trunk lowering inch by inch until it touched the earth. The rangers held their breath. Mara's trunk uncurled, and Ranger slid gently onto the dust, his body limp, his fur matted with dried blood and sand. For one heartbeat, she lingered above him, trunk still touching his side as if reluctant to let go. Then she stepped back, 1, 2, 3 paces, and stood still. That small movement, deliberate, cautious, trusting, broke something open in every heart watching. "She's stepping back," Grace whispered, her voice trembling. "She's showing she won't attack." Eli nodded slowly, eyes shining. "No," he said quietly. "She's showing trust." Grace stared at the dog's broken form on the ground, then back at the towering creature that had carried him across miles of merciless terrain. "She's asking us to help." The words were barely audible, yet they carried like thunder through the stunned silence. Emily's small hand found her uncle's. "Uncle Jack, she understands us," she whispered. "Doesn't she?" Jack couldn't speak. He could only nod. The air between them changed. It wasn't just silence now. It was reverence. Every instinct that once defined the difference between human and wild dissolved like mist under sunlight. The line that had divided species, built fences, and fed fear was gone. What remained was something older, the language of compassion, spoken without words. Grace felt her legs moving before her mind caught up. She stepped forward, slow, deliberate, open-handed. Her heart raced, but her voice, when it came, was steady, warm, almost maternal. "It's all right," she said softly. "We see him. We'll help him. I promise." Mara tilted her great head, one ear flicking slightly. Her eyes, deep, liquid pools of memory and understanding, met Grace's. For a long, unbroken moment, the two simply regarded one another, the healer and the mother, predator and prey no longer relevant. Then, from deep within her chest, Mara let out a low, resonant rumble. It was not a warning. It was acknowledgement, approval. Grace's breath caught. Tears blurred her vision as the sound rippled through the clearing, vibrating in her ribs, sinking into the ground beneath her feet. "She heard you," Eli murmured. "She believed you." Grace turned toward him, voice barely a whisper. "Eli, she knows. She knows what I said." He nodded once, eyes fixed on Mara. "Because you didn't speak to her mind," he said. "You spoke to her heart." Emily stepped from behind her uncle, unable to stay still any longer. "Uncle Jack, look," she whispered. "She's not afraid anymore." Indeed, Mara stood calmer now, her breathing slower, her stance relaxed, her trunk no longer trembling. The dust settled gently around her feet, the heat shimmer softening to gold. Jack lowered his rifle, realizing he had been gripping it the whole time. He placed it on the ground, palm up, an unspoken gesture of surrender. Grace knelt beside the wounded dog, her shadow falling across Ranger's body. She reached out, touching his flank, feeling the faint, shallow rise of his ribs. "He's alive," she said softly, her voice breaking with relief. "Barely, but alive." At the sound, Mara's ears flicked. Her trunk moved, not in defense but curiosity. She leaned forward until the tip hovered inches from Grace's shoulder. Grace didn't flinch. Instead, she let the elephant's breath wash over her, warm, earthy, full of dust and life. "It's all right," Grace whispered again, eyes glistening. "We'll take care of him, I promise." For a moment, the elephant didn't move. Then she rumbled once more, softer this time, a tone that vibrated like a mother humming to her child. Emily wiped at her eyes. "She understands you, Dr. Grace," she said quietly. "She really does." Grace smiled through tears. Maybe understanding isn't about words, she said. Maybe it's about trust. The moment stretched, suspended between worlds. Around them, even the wind seemed to kneel. No one spoke. No one dared to, because deep down, every person standing there knew they were witnessing something sacred, a fragment of a forgotten truth that the modern world had almost erased, that all living things are bound by the same fragile thread of compassion. Mara's gaze drifted to the horizon, the place where her herd's voices would have once called her home. But she didn't turn back. Instead, she remained where she was, silent and steady, as if passing the responsibility for her companion into human hands. Grace rose slowly, her face shining with awe. "All right," she said softly, looking at Jack. "Let's move carefully. Get the med kit ready. We're doing this her way." Jack nodded, his voice thick. "Her way? With trust," Grace replied. And as the sun burned low over the plains, its light gilding the dust and tears alike, the ancient line between wild and human vanished completely, replaced by something that didn't belong to either world, but to both. The clearing around the ranger station had turned into a strange, sacred place, half field hospital, half temple. The air shimmered with heat and silence. The only sound was the faint rattle of metal instruments as Dr. Grace McConnell knelt beside Ranger, preparing to perform a surgery no medical book had ever imagined. A field operation on a dying dog, under the unblinking gaze of a wild elephant. Sweat streaked down her temples as she spoke, more to herself than anyone. "We'll need clean saline, antiseptic, lidocaine, and keep those sutures ready." Her hands moved with practiced precision, but her mind was trembling. She had treated wolves, cougars, even a tranquilized bear once, but never with an audience like this. Just a few meters away stood Mara, her immense frame looming like a guardian mountain. Every breath she took stirred the air around them, warm and heavy with earth. Her trunk swayed gently, not in aggression, but in anxious rhythm. Her eyes never left Ranger. Jack Dawson stood nearby, rifle lowered, his heart pounding in time with the ticking of Grace's instruments. Beside him, Eli Redfeather sat cross-legged on the ground, a small wooden flute in his hands. Emily watched from the doorway of the station, fingers clenched tight around the frame, tears already brimming, though the operation hadn't even begun. Grace glanced toward Jack. "If she moves closer, I'll need you to keep her calm. Talk to her. Slowly." Jack nodded, swallowing hard. "Got it." Then Grace inhaled deeply and began. "All right, boy," she murmured to the unconscious shepherd. "Let's get you back." She started cleaning the wound, a gash along the hind leg, deep and brutal. The steel snare had cut through muscle to the bone. Dried blood crusted the fur. Infection had begun to bloom, the smell sharp and sour in the heat. Grace fought the nausea rising in her throat as she poured antiseptic over the wound. The dog flinched and whimpered in his half-conscious state. And that sound, that faint, pained cry, "Pom-pom," tore through Mara like lightning. The elephant jolted, ears twitching, her trunk swinging forward instinctively. The ground trembled with a heavy step. Jack instantly raised his hand, stepping between them. "Easy," he whispered, voice steady but firm. "Easy, girl. She's helping him. You brought him here for this, remember?" Mara's head tilted, her massive body tensing. A deep rumble built in her chest, low, uncertain. Her eyes flicked between the human and the dog, between pain and trust. Jack kept his voice low, calm, rhythmic, the tone he'd once used with his own canine partner years ago. "That's it. You did good bringing him here. Let her finish. She's fixing him." Grace kept working, her gloved hands slick with sweat and blood. "There's damage to the tendons," she said aloud, partly to her team and partly to Mara. "But it's repairable. I'm going to cut away the infected tissue now. It'll look bad, but it's necessary." She spoke softly, constantly, explaining every move. The tone was clinical, but the words carried something else: reassurance. "I know this hurts him," she murmured, "but it's how he survives. You're doing great, big guy." Ranger let out a sharp whine. Grace's shoulders tensed. She paused to steady her hands. From behind her, a sound floated through the heavy air. The first soft note of Eli's flute. It was a low, trembling melody, a tone older than language, carrying the rhythm of breath and wind. The sound drifted toward Shunhung, Mara, slow and soothing. The elephant's ears twitched. Her breathing slowed. She lowered her trunk slightly, the tip hovering near the ground. Grace continued stitching, her voice syncing with the music. "Cleaning now, almost through the worst part. He's a fighter, just like you." Mara let out a long exhale that rolled through the clearing like distant thunder. Jack risked a glance back. Her tusks were inches from the ground, her eyes glossy with emotion. For a creature of her size, her stillness was unimaginable. Grace stitched, layer by layer, sealing flesh back together. Her movements became a rhythm of their own. Snip, pull, tie, breathe. Every few minutes she would look up, whispering softly, "He's holding on. We're almost there." Ranger twitched once, his paw jerking weakly. Grace's heart leapt, a sign of life, of fight. But the moment of relief shattered when a deeper cry escaped him, a guttural, wounded sound. Mara reacted instantly. She let out a sharp trumpet, the sound piercing the air like a siren. Dust flew. Emily screamed from the doorway. Jack stepped forward fast, hands raised. "Mara, it's okay," he shouted over the noise. "He's not dying, she's saving him." The elephant froze mid-trumpet. Her ears flicked back, her breathing ragged. Then, slowly, she turned her gaze to Grace. The doctor didn't look up. She didn't even flinch. She just kept talking, voice calm but full of emotion. "I know it hurts him," she said, her words steady but trembling with empathy. "But it has to. Please trust me. I'm trying to save him. Just a little longer." The wind fell still again. Mara's trunk dropped, resting in the dust. Then, after a heartbeat that felt eternal, she took one step forward and extended it. The tip of her trunk reached out, trembling, and came to rest lightly on Ranger's side. Every human froze. Grace's scalpel stopped mid-air. Eli's flute fell silent. Jack felt his breath catch. The touch was impossibly gentle, barely brushing the fur, as though she feared breaking him. Yet it carried something no words could express. Protection. Fear. Love. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Her voice cracked. "It's okay," she whispered. "Stay with him, Mama. You're helping too." She resumed her work. The flute began again, a slow morning lullaby. Mara's rumbles began to match it, low and steady, creating a harmony that vibrated through the clearing. It was as if two hearts, one human, one animal, were learning to beat in time. Minutes stretched into hours. The light began to change, afternoon melting toward gold. Sweat soaked Grace's back, her fingers trembling from exhaustion. Finally, she tied the last knot in the suture and whispered, "Done." She sat back on her heels, panting. Blood and antiseptic stained her hands, her knees, her soul. Ranger lay motionless but breathing, his flank rising in steady rhythm. The wound was cleaned, stitched, and bandaged. Mara's trunk moved again, brushing gently over the bandage, inspecting, approving. Then she looked up, her eyes locking with Grace's. In them was gratitude so deep It didn't need translation. Grace nodded, her own tears falling freely. "He's safe now," she whispered. "You did it." Eli's flute faded into silence. Jack exhaled, for the first time in what felt like hours. Emily ran forward, stopping just short of touching the dog, her small hands clasped together in awe. No one spoke. No one dared. Time for pool. Because in that moment, surrounded by dust, blood, and fading sunlight, something holy had happened. A wild elephant and a group of humans had performed a miracle, not through dominance or fear, but through faith. Grace wiped her eyes, looking at the two creatures before her. The Savior and the saved. "We just witnessed the impossible," she said softly. Eli nodded, his gaze distant, reverent. "Not impossible," he murmured. "Just forgotten." Mara rumbled one last time, a deep, resonant sound that filled the clearing with peace. Then she stepped back, letting the humans tend to her friend. And for the first time since the world began to divide itself between wild and civilized, trust had crossed the line and stayed. Night came softly over the Wyoming plains, like a dark blanket drawn across a trembling heart. The last streaks of orange light faded behind the hills, and the ranger station sank into a hush so profound that even the insects seemed to hold their breath. The world, moments ago burning under the sun, now glowed faintly in moonlight. Silver on dust, silver on skin, silver on tears. In the center of the clearing lay Ranger, wrapped in bandages and sleep. His breathing came slow and steady now, the rasp of survival. Beside him, standing silent as stone, was Mara. The elephant had not moved in hours. Her shadow stretched long over the ground, the curve of her tusks gleaming faintly. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't drunk. Every time Grace or one of the rangers tried to coax her toward the buckets of water they'd set nearby, she only turned her head slightly, as if to say, "Not yet." Her eyes never left the wounded dog. From the far side of the compound, Jack Dawson watched her through the dim glow of a lantern. He stood with his arms folded, the faint smell of coffee rising from the tin mug in his hand. But the drink had long gone cold. He wasn't drinking it, just holding it, the way a man holds on to something when he can't hold on to his thoughts. Beside him, Dr. Grace McConnell finished checking Ranger's vitals. Her face was drawn, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. When she straightened up, she joined Jack in the quiet. "She hasn't moved all night," Grace said softly. Jack nodded. "I know." "She's not eating," Grace added, glancing toward the buckets. "That's a bad sign. Elephants dehydrate fast. She's burning energy just standing there." Jack's gaze remained fixed on the massive silhouette bathed in moonlight. "Maybe she's not hungry," he murmured. "Maybe she's waiting." Grace tilted her head. "Waiting for what?" Jack swallowed hard. "For him to wake up." The air between them grew still again. The faint hum of the generator inside the station seemed far away, like the heartbeat of another world. Grace rubbed the back of her neck, looking toward Mara. "I've read about elephants keeping vigil over their dead. But this is something else. She's guarding him like her own calf." "She carried him 15 kilometers, Jack said quietly. "If that doesn't make him her calf, I don't know what does." Grace smiled faintly. "You sound like you believe she knows exactly what's happening." Jack's eyes reflected the moonlight, deep and tired. "Grace, I've seen mothers lose their kids in fires. I've seen dogs lay down next to their fallen handlers and refuse to move until they're carried away. And I've seen soldiers bury their partners and talk to the graves like someone's listening. You tell me what's instinct and what's love because I can't tell the difference anymore." Grace looked at him for a long moment. The kind of look that says, I understand. Maybe there isn't a difference, she said softly. Maybe love is the oldest instinct of all. They stood in silence after that, watching the two creatures under the pale moonlight, one lying broken, one standing guard. Every so often, Mara would rumble low in her chest, a sound that vibrated through the air and into the bones, a lullaby older than humanity itself. When she did, Ranger's breathing seemed to steady, his body relaxing, as if he recognized the sound even in sleep. Jack stepped forward a few paces, drawn unconsciously closer, and lowered himself onto the edge of the station steps. You know, he said quietly, when I lost Rex, my partner, I couldn't stop replaying that last night. The way he looked at me before he went back in. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew I was in danger. That was enough for him. Grace listened, her voice gentle. You tried to save him. He nodded, eyes distant. Didn't matter. He went back anyway. I guess that's what love looks like when you don't have words. For a moment, the only reply was Mara's low hum, deep, resonant, as if the earth itself answered. At the edge of the clearing, Emily appeared, carrying a small metal pail that glinted in the moonlight. Her bare feet moved carefully through the dust. The water inside sloshed softly. Emily, Grace whispered, what are you doing out here? The girl didn't answer. She just kept walking until she was close enough that the elephant could see her clearly. Mara's great head turned slowly, eyes gleaming like dark glass. Emily froze, small and fragile before the immense shadow of the matriarch. Then, gathering courage, she took one more step and set the bucket gently on the ground. I thought maybe she's thirsty, Emily said softly. Jack started forward, his heart lurching, but Grace caught his arm. Wait, she murmured. Let her try. Mara's trunk shifted, curling in the air, uncertain, curious. The scent of clean water reached her. For several long seconds, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she extended her trunk toward the girl. The air stirred, warm and soft, carrying the faint smell of grass and dust. Emily didn't flinch. She lifted her small hand, letting the tip of the trunk brush against her fingers. The contact was feather-light. A silent exchange passed between them, one of those moments too pure to describe. Then Mara lowered her trunk into the bucket and drew up a slow sip of water. Grace let out a shaky laugh. She took it, she whispered. Jack exhaled for the first time in minutes. Yeah, he said, voice thick. She knows kindness when she sees it. Mara lifted her head again, droplets glistening from her trunk. Then, astonishingly, she turned and sprayed a faint mist over Ranger's bandaged leg, as if blessing the wound. Emily smiled through tears. She's saying thank you. The air shimmered with something unspoken. Awe, maybe. Reverence. Grace wiped her eyes. I've spent my whole life studying animals, she said softly. But this is something no book could explain. She's grieving, protecting, hoping, all at once. Jack nodded. Maybe that's what makes her more civilized than us. Us? Grace asked quietly. He gestured around, to the fences, the metal, the station lights cutting through the night. We spend our lives building walls because we're afraid of losing what we love. She walked through a world that hates her kind just to save a creature that isn't even hers. Tell me, which one of us really understands civilization? Grace looked away, blinking hard. You might be right. Far off, in the deep night, a sound echoed, faint, distant, haunting. A trumpet call rolled across the plains, long and mournful. Mara's ears twitched. Her head turned slightly toward the horizon. Grace's eyes widened. Her herd, she whispered. They're looking for her. Mara stood perfectly still, listening. The call came again, softer now, fading into the wind. Her eyes lingered on the dark horizon, then returned to the dog at her feet. She rumbled once, low, tender, and stayed where she was. Jack's voice broke the silence, quiet but sure. She's not leaving. No, Grace said softly. Not until he's strong enough to follow. The night deepened around them, full of stars and silence and the heartbeat of something far greater than fear. And as the moon climbed higher, its silver light wrapped around the figures in the clearing. The ranger who had once lost faith, the doctor who had found wonder again, and the elephant who refused to abandon love. Time was running short. But for now, in this fragile moment suspended between worlds, love still held the night together. The first light of dawn crept slowly over the Wyoming plains, spilling gold across the dust and the roofs of the ranger station. The night's chill still clung to the earth, but in the clearing, something had changed, something fragile, miraculous. Ranger was standing. It wasn't much. His hind legs shook beneath the bandages, and his head drooped with exhaustion. But he was up. For the first time since the trap had closed around him, he stood on his own. The bandages were stained, but the wound held firm. His breathing, once ragged and uneven, came steady now, like a fire rebuilding from embers. Beside him, Mara watched, her massive frame still and reverent. Her trunk hovered close, ready to steady him if he fell. The dawn light brushed her gray skin, revealing the cracks of fatigue etched into her body. Her eyes, once bright with determination, now held the heavy gloss of exhaustion. Grace McConnell stepped closer, holding a clipboard against her chest, her face breaking into a weary smile. "He's doing it," she whispered. "He's really doing it." Jack Dawson, standing a few feet away with his arms crossed, allowed himself a small nod. "Tough little soldier," he murmured. "Didn't think he had the strength left." Emily, still wrapped in a blanket, crouched in the dust near Ranger, her face glowing with joy. "He's standing, Uncle Jack. Look at him." Jack smiled faintly. "I see him, kiddo." But even as they celebrated, Grace's gaze shifted toward Mara, the way her ribs showed through her hide, the sluggish sway of her trunk. Her breaths were coming faster now, shallow and labored. Grace's smile faded. "Jack." "She's not okay." He followed, her gaze, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "She hasn't eaten or properly drunk in almost 3 days," Grace said. "Her body's conserving energy, but even elephants have limits. She's been burning through her reserves since the moment she found him." Jack's jaw tightened. "You're saying she's starving herself?" "I'm saying," Grace replied quietly, "that if she doesn't return to her herd soon, she's going to collapse. And if that happens out here, we won't be able to save her." Emily's smile faltered. She looked from the elephant to the adults, confusion turning quickly to fear. "But she can't leave him. She won't." Grace crouched down to meet the girl's eyes. "Sweetheart, elephants are strong, but they're also social. Mara needs her family, not just for food and water, but for her mind. If she stays separated too long, she'll stop eating altogether." Emily's voice trembled. "But she came all this way to save him. We can't make her go back alone." Jack sighed deeply, rubbing the back of his neck. "Grace, even if we wanted to help her find the herd, we wouldn't know where to start. They could be 20 miles from here by now." A quiet voice broke the tension. "Not 20, said Eli Redfeather, stepping out from behind the station. His face was calm but focused, his weathered hands holding a small bundle of herbs and dried grass. "They're closer than you think." Jack frowned. "How can you tell?" Eli knelt, sprinkling some of the dried grass onto the ground. The morning breeze shifted, carrying with it a faint, distant sound, a low, rolling trumpet echoing across the plains. Faint, but distinct. Emily gasped. "That's them!" Eli nodded slowly. "They've been searching for her since last night. The wind carries their calls." Grace looked up, her eyes lighting with hope. "Then maybe we can bring them here." Jack blinked. "Bring them here? To the station?" Eli met his gaze evenly. "Yes." Jack let out a low whistle. "Eli, do you hear yourself? You're talking about calling in an entire elephant herd to a human facility. We've got equipment, supplies, fuel drums. They'll destroy everything." Eli's eyes didn't waver. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll understand, the same way Mara did." Grace stepped closer. "He's right, Jack. If we can reunite her with her family here, she won't have to choose. She can stay close until Ranger is strong enough to walk." Jack hesitated. He looked toward the massive elephant standing under the rising sun, her sides heaving, her gaze fixed on the dog she refused to leave. There was something in her stance, something heartbreakingly human. He turned away, shaking his head. "You're asking me to risk this entire station on a feeling." Eli stood quietly, hands clasped behind his back. "No," he said softly. "I'm asking you to trust what she already risked her life for. Compassion." The words hit like an echo from something older, something Jack had buried years ago. He looked at Ranger, then at Mara, and finally at Emily, the child's tearful face full of belief. She whispered, "Please, Uncle Jack, we can't make her choose between love and survival." He felt his throat tighten. It was Rex all over again, the dog who had chosen love over safety and died for it. Jack had never forgiven himself for not understanding it sooner. He met Grace's eyes. "How would we even do it?" Eli stepped forward, his tone calm but sure. "Elephants use scent and low-frequency calls to find their herds. We can create a scent trail using the grasses Mara's been standing on. I can mimic the herd's greeting rumbles with a subwoofer rig from the station. If they're within 10 miles, they'll hear it." Grace's scientific mind sparked with possibility. It could work. If we match their frequency, we might draw them in, slowly, peacefully. Jack stared at the ground, weighing everything. The risk, the memory of loss, the hope in the child's eyes. "All right," he said finally, voice low. "Let's do it." Emily exhaled a soft, trembling laugh of relief. Grace squeezed Jack's arm with quiet gratitude. Eli nodded, already moving. "We'll need the old speakers from the storage shed, some generator power, and her scent on these leaves. The rest," he smiled faintly, "the rest will be up to the wind." As the team scattered to prepare, Jack lingered by the clearing. Mara lifted her head, watching them curiously, her trunk curling in the air as if sensing the change. Jack spoke softly, half to himself, half to her. "We're bringing your family to you, girl. Just hang on." Mara's great eyes blinked slowly, a flicker of understanding passing through them. She rumbled, low, weary, but hopeful. By the time the sun fully rose, the Rangers had arranged speakers along the edge of the clearing. The hum of machinery filled the air, followed by the first low vibration, a deep, rolling sound that traveled through the ground like thunder beneath the soil. The air trembled. Somewhere far off, a faint answering call echoed. Eli smiled. "They've heard us." Emily clasped her hands together, eyes wide with wonder. Grace's breath caught in her chest. And as the sound rippled through the golden morning, it wasn't just a call to elephants. It was a call to something buried deep in every living heart. The belief that love, when met with compassion, can bridge any divide. For the Huffsons, first time in his life, Jack Dawson understood. Humanity's greatest act of rescue wasn't saving nature from itself. It was learning to welcome it home. Dawn arrived shrouded in mist. The Wyoming plains lay veiled under a pearly silence, the kind that feels like the breath held between heartbeats. The air was cool, heavy with dew, and dry grass. Inside the ranger compound, everything seemed to wait. Even the birds were still. Then it began. A faint vibration through the soil, trembling coffee cups, and hearts alike. Eli Redfeather lifted his head first. "They're here," he murmured. Grace McConnell stepped from the medical tent, wiping her hands. The sound deepened, rumbles, low and resonant, like the language Mara once used to call across miles of savannah. But this time, the calls were answering her. From the horizon, the mist stirred, shadows emerged. First one, then three, then dozens. Mara's herd had come home. Grace's throat tightened. The elephants appeared and vanished through the fog, colossal, spectral, each step sending tremors through the earth. Calves pressed against their mothers. Young bulls followed in solemn rhythm. The air filled with rumbles, curious, cautious, alive. The rangers gathered silently. Jack Dawson stood at the front, rifle slung but untouched. Emily clung to his arm. Eli moved closer, listening as though he could understand. In the clearing's center stood Mara, the matriarch who had defied instinct, who had crossed worlds for love. She raised her head and trumpeted, a sound that split the mist, like revelation. The herd answered. They moved faster, slowing only when they reached the clearing's edge, forming a semicircle. Their eyes shifted between Mara and the humans, trunks lifting to taste the air. No fear, no rage, only awe. Then, Ranger stirred. The German shepherd, thin but healing, stood trembling. His tail flicked. He barked, soft, fragile, yet clear enough to bridge every wall between them. Mara turned, rumbling deep in her chest, a sound of recognition. The herd stilled, listening to the small creature who had once saved one of their own. Eli smiled faintly. He remembers. The herd began to move again, circling Mara and Ranger in a slow dance of kinship. Calves stretched trunks to touch him. Mothers rumbled greetings. Even the eldest bulls bowed their heads, not in submission, but in respect. Grace's eyes filled with tears. "They're accepting him," she whispered. Jack's voice cracked. "Maybe love speaks louder than species." For the first time, humans and elephants stood together in peace. No boundaries, no fear, only trust. Mara stepped forward, leaving the herd to approach Grace. The veterinarian froze, but didn't retreat. Mara's trunk curled gently through the air. Grace lifted her hand. Skin met hide, brief, trembling, sacred. The moment carried the weight of sleepless nights and shared hope. "You did it, Mama," Grace whispered. "You saved him." Mara brushed Grace's arm, then lowered her trunk beside Ranger. A soft, melodic rumble filled the clearing. Gratitude, pure and wordless. "She's saying thank you," Emily murmured. Grace shook her head gently. "She's saying goodbye." The herd called to their matriarch. Mara looked back at them, then down at Ranger one last time. The dog met her gaze, tail twitching weakly. She wrapped her trunk around him in a final embrace, then trumpeted once more. The herd answered. Slowly, they turned toward the plains. Mara lingered, eyes sweeping over the humans. Grace the healer, Jack the protector, Emily, the child who brought her water under the stars. Mara reached her trunk toward the girl. Emily stepped forward, touching the wrinkled skin. "Goodbye," she whispered. "Thank you for trusting us." Mara exhaled softly, her breath stirring the child's hair, like blessing. Then she turned, vanishing into mist. Silence followed, deep, golden, full. Grace stood motionless, the warmth of Mara's touch lingering. Jack's voice came rough with awe. "Ever seen anything like that?" Grace shook her head. "And never will again." Eli gazed toward the horizon. "She'll remember," he said quietly. "Her calves will carry this story." Emily knelt beside Ranger, stroking his fur. "Then maybe someday they'll tell their children about the humans who helped." Grace smiled through tears. "Maybe they already are." And the mist closed around them, not as an ending, but as memory, where love had crossed the line and never looked back. Weeks passed. The plains returned to their rhythm, wind sighing through tall grass, eagles carving the sky. But the land wasn't the same. Everywhere lay footprints, massive impressions hardened in the dust, tracing the herd's path home. Each morning, Jack walked among them, sometimes following to the riverbed, where he'd kneel, pressing his palm into a trunk print. "Still warm," he'd whisper. Ranger grew stronger, his limp permanent, but his spirit fierce. He roamed freely near the station, both guardian and bridge between wild and human. Each dawn, he trotted to the acacia's edge, looked toward the horizon, and barked twice, greeting, not warning. Some nights the rangers swore they heard an answering rumble, faint, but real. Grace kept her tent up, though it had become more shrine than workspace. A photograph hung inside, Emily's picture of Mara standing over Ranger on the morning he recovered. Grace often stared at it when nights grew long. "Look at her eyes," she once said to Eli over tea. "There's thought there, not instinct thought." Eli smiled. "You're seeing what she saw in you." And what was that? Another creature who knew love isn't owned, it's shared. News of the reunion spread fast. Scientists, journalists, conservationists, they poured in, eager to study the phenomenon. Jack despised the noise, until something silenced even the skeptics. A ranger patrol reported another herd near the South Valley. What made it remarkable wasn't their presence, but their approach. Instead of retreating, the elephants advanced slowly toward the humans. The matriarch, scarred and ancient, stopped a few meters away, lowered her trunk, and waited. A young ranger stepped forward, placing his hand in the dust where her trunk had touched. The elephant rumbled softly, then turned and walked away. Grace read the report later. The final line stayed with her. It wasn't just trust. It felt like they were asking if we'd learned anything. Within weeks, similar encounters appeared across the region. Herds approaching waterholes, mothers bringing calves near vehicles, elephants lingering, instead of fleeing. Experts couldn't explain it. Conservationists called it the Mara phenomenon. Eli called it remembrance. "Stories passed down through families," he said one evening by the fire. "Humans use words. Elephants use feeling. Memory carried in the herd. What Mara did changed their story about us." Jack stared into the flames. "Maybe that's what saving the wild really means," he said. "Not keeping it away, but making it safe to come closer." Grace nodded. "Maybe love isn't only human. Maybe it's the Earth's language. When we finally listen." Silence settled again, deep and peaceful. Ranger dozed by the acacia, ears twitching at distant sounds the humans couldn't hear. One evening, Emily's voice broke the calm from the watchtower. "Uncle Jack, you need to see this!" Jack climbed the ladder, expecting a false alarm, But when he reached the top, the sight stole his breath. At the far edge of the plains, bathed in crimson light, stood a single silhouette, enormous, unmistakable. Mara. Miles away, yet clear against the sunset, she stood proud and timeless. The wind carried a faint rumble, low and melodic. Ranger barked sharply from below, tail wagging. Mara lifted her trunk high in reply. Grace's voice trembled beside Jack. She came back. He shook his head slowly. No, she never really left. The sun dipped lower, painting gold across the land. Mara's outline shimmered, merging with the light. Part of the earth, part of the story. Then, with one final trumpet echoing like memory, she turned and vanished into the wild. Jack stood long after she was gone. You think she'll come again? Eli's voice floated from below. She doesn't need to. The world remembers now. Grace's eyes glistened. Maybe that's what trust really is, she whispered. A promise left behind in someone else's heart. As night fell, the station lights flickered on. Ranger lay by the steps, tail thumping softly. The air was cool, full of crickets and memory. Beyond sight, the herd moved through twilight, their rumbles weaving through the wind. A song older than time. It was not farewell. It was continuity. And as stars rose over the endless plains, the bond between one elephant, one dog, and a handful of humans endured. Not in cages or fences, but in trust, where it had always belonged. A faint rumble echoed through the night, not loud, not near, but unmistakable to those who listened. It sounded like hope. Sometimes, stories like this remind us why dogs hold such a sacred place in our hearts. A German shepherd's loyalty, steady, unspoken, unwavering, reflects the best of what love can be. Honest, selfless, pure. And when that love meets human compassion, something extraordinary happens. It bridges the quiet space between species and shows us that kindness is the one language the whole world understands. If this story touched you, maybe take a moment to do something special for your own dog today. An extra walk, a gentle brush, or just sitting together in the quiet. And if you ever want to explore ways to understand your dog on a deeper level, there's a wonderful resource I've found that helps strengthen that bond. You can check it out, if it feels right to you. Because at the end of the day, it's not about training or technique. It's about trust, love, and that silent promise they give us every time their eyes meet ours. And that is the language of the heart.